Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. I'm really honored to have the whole film team, as you can see, from Prognosis, Notes on Living. Welcome, everybody. It's really good to see you here. So, as somebody who knew Chaz, I just want to thank you for your really beautiful, direct, and honest film. It was a very difficult film to watch as somebody who knew Chaz quite well. And it was also really wonderful to be able to spend time with her and be with her again and really see her humor, her wit, her critical thinking, and, her filmmaking vision. So I just want to appreciate all of you. I know it takes a tribe to make a film, and you all really stepped up to bring not only the Bay Area community and the film community this film, but, I think this film will be used in the way that Chaz would have wanted. So thank you for that. So Kate Stille Steiner, you have a co-directing credit with Chaz. And so I thought maybe we could start with you. And if you could talk a little bit about, how the project came about. And I know you had a relationship with Chaz prior. How did this idea come together, and how did your role on it emerge?
Well, Chaz was a documentary filmmaker, and so when she was diagnosed, it just was absolutely natural that she would decide to film her experience. And all of her friends, everyone you see on this panel, we are all filmmakers, and so it just made sense for us to jump in and help. She asked us all to be available to help out however we could, and so we really worked together from the very, very beginning to just help her make her experience come to life. And so my own personal experience, I edited with her for many years, and I co-produced with her for a couple of projects. So when the story turned to her actually leaving us with this beautiful film, it made sense for Citizen Film, my documentary film nonprofit, to head up the process of getting the thing, ready to actually be edited. So I worked very closely with our senior editor, Mike Shen, and this whole fabulous team to just birth this baby.
And can you talk a little bit about the conversations that you had around Chaz's vision for the film? What kind of agreements did you make from the beginning? And how did that change as time went on?
Yeah, because we had worked together for many years, I knew, and we talked as she was going through this experience. We all talked to her about what are we making, and when she was no longer with us, we also knew that it was up to us to find the film that she and we had made together. And so what we did was we dug through over 200 hours of film footage, and we looked for the very best film that we possibly could make. And it turned out that the film that we knew we had was a beautiful personal memoir of a love story of the adventure of going through this experience, Chaz and Nancy's experience going through this.
So Nancy, I guess I'll turn to you since the love story has just been mentioned. And I wanted to ask you, what was it like for you to be part of this film, not only as, the love interest or the love story, the subject in the film, but also a producer on it? And can you talk about, you know, just thoughts and reflections on your experience in general with the project and what you learned?
Well, it definitely has been an evolving experience. In the beginning, it was something I really didn't want to do, but I could see that it was really important to Chaz, and her doctors felt it was very important to her health to be engaged in a project that she was so passionate about. So I quickly got on board and wanted to support her in whatever way that way. And I think as time went on through her illness, as it progressed, you know, I started to, I think both of us felt like the filming was a witness to our journey that was really important to us. It was, it felt like something to help hold both of us through it. And knowing that it would continue after her passing was also of a comfort, and that we had a team together who was committed to see it through. After she passed, it was pretty brutal, honestly, to watch 200 hours of our most vulnerable moments together, and to watch her die over and over again was pretty brutal. But there, you know, the grieving process is an interesting one. And to have this community together through the last 3 years as we made this film together and held Chaz, it was a beautiful gift that Chaz gave me. And I think to all of us, but I don't speak for myself, that, you know, it's just an amazing gift. And now that it's going out into the world, it feels like, you know, the gift keeps getting bigger and bigger. And it's just a beautiful thing for me.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I'm really sorry for your loss and for our loss as a community. And you know, it strikes me that this film in the public space, you know, is very different for all of us than for you. You know, I feel like I'm curious as to how involved, you know, you were in the editing process. Was there a point where you said, you know, I think I'm gonna pass on being part of this for the day? And is it any different as the film is being released in public? Is it more, is it easier to be involved in this phase?
My colleagues will have to help me remember, because my memory is not so great from those early moments after Chaz died. But I think in the beginning I was very involved, and then there was a point where I realized I couldn't watch the footage as much as the other folks could, and I had to, you know, take care of myself that way. But I still came to every meeting. I just didn't watch as much footage leading up to the meetings. We all were assigned different hours of footage to look at and try to pull the best parts out of. But now, you know, I would say also in this last stretch of finalizing the film, getting it ready to go to the festivals, I also felt like I think my work is done in terms of ensuring that the story is as accurate and as true to our hearts as possible. And now I feel, you know, I'm excited about the partnerships that we're developing for the film. And that's really where my interest is. I don't feel I need to watch the film, because I still do, you know, I have a recovery period after I watch that film of about 24 to 48 hours. So, you know, that's part of the journey too.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about partnerships. I'm curious about partnerships. One thing that really struck me and as comic and kind of funny in the film was the spiritual differences between you and Chaz, and, you know, the Chaz being on her phone when you were trying to, you know, meditate. And I think like what makes the film so beautiful is that when you're facing, you know, death and dying as an issue, you are trying to, you know, grapple with leaving this planet, and your relationship to spirituality may become important. So I'm curious about the partnerships, and I know that you've developed a partnership with Jewish Family and Children's Services, and we have Tracy Bravanovna here, who's going to tell us a little bit about how are you working with the film project, and how are you all envisioning the film living in the world and being helpful to other people?
Thank you. Yeah, so Jewish Family and Children's Service was really excited when Kate and her team reached out to us about developing, a guide for community conversations. So, the film is a legacy, but beyond that, really to get people to have these conversations. And part of the work that we do here with our palliative care is really about, planning and having those conversations and people being able to live the life that they want. And I think that's just portrayed so beautifully in this film that, Chaz was able to, control the narrative in some sense, very much so by filming it, but everyone can take some control. But in order to do that, you really have to have these ongoing conversations. And so we will be developing a conversation guide that can accompany the film so that it can be shown, in various settings to various groups. Obviously, since we're Jewish Family and Children's Services, we will be bringing in, kind of that spiritual piece. Just because, right, it is a time where people are searching for meaning, and one way to find that is through teachings and learnings.
Yeah, I mean, I think one value of the film is to have direct and more open conversations about death and dying. People have such, discomfort with, the subject and with really talking to partners, to family, to doctors, to, friends and the community at large. And I think, that's a big value of the film. In the medical appointments, I thought that, that particularly became clear. Like it was really important to see a window into some of these medical interactions. And I'm wondering for those of you who were in the room and part of that, maybe Lydia, I noticed you were in one of the scenes, shooting with Chaz in a medical office. Can you talk about, what your experience of that was, and also what value do you think those scenes are going to be for people who are facing these challenges?
Well, it's a bit of a schizophrenic experience because I'm there filming as a cinematographer, and then I'm also there as a friend, listening to and bearing witness to the content, the medical content of the visit, as well as the emotional reality that's happening as things are unfolding. So, that can be challenging to do both at once, depending on what's going on. And it was definitely something that I think I got a little bit better at over time, sort of balancing the two realities and keeping focused on the camera. And what was your other question? I'm sorry.
Well, as you look at those scenes now, like how do you think they can be helpful to people in those situations? Because I realized it was very emotional at that time. And now looking at it, do you have that sort of big picture view at this point?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've actually heard from people who have seen the film, who've reported getting insight about that kind of relationship with medical practitioners, and being surprised often at the intimacy that doctors would give you a hug after a visit, whether it was challenging or good news. And I believe there's so much about how oncology and medicine is changing right now in terms of dealing with patients and families, that I think there's a lot of richness in those scenes, both for patients and their communities, as well as for medical practitioners.
Yeah, yeah. And Carrie Lozano, I want to turn to you. You're executive producer on this project. So like when you were thinking about coming in on the project, and you also were really close with Chaz, how were you thinking about this film? And your role on it, both getting it done, but also getting it out in the world where it could be useful?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I love hearing just the team talk about it, because I feel like the backstory of this film is as powerful as the film itself. And so I'm just so happy that we're all here. So thank you, Lexi. I mean, you know, one of the first things that happened when Chaz told me that she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer is she asked if I would help her get access to the medical facility, to UCSF. And then kind of once we did that, which was its own process, as you can imagine, she kind of took over and she directed the film for as long as she could, you know, and calling people and pulling people together. And in her mind, I think when we had conversations as things were going on, she kept wondering whether she was a good character. You know, she would say, like, I just don't know if I'm a good character, which it turns out, yes, she really is, which is not a surprise to any of us who knew her. But, you know, that was something she grappled with. But as we watched the footage, I think it became apparent to all of us that, or at least to me, it feels like she knew exactly what she was doing and that she knew that this would be of service, that must have been really clear to her, I think. And it was really, Lexi, toward the end that she asked me if I would executive produce the film, probably within the last 6 months of her life. And I said I would, and I took that really seriously and really took it to heart. And I think that's the role that I've tried to play. So I wasn't as in the weeds all the time with the team, but really tried to be the kind of, not a buffer, but just someone who's thinking about the strategy. How are we going to roll the film out? Where could it go? What kind of a life could it have once we decided kind of what it was going to look like and what shape it was going to take? And I think looking back at those days, like, to me, those are really precious conversations that we had. And they started soon after she died. We kind of jumped right in, and how amazing it was to kind of find, as Kate said, to kind of look at that footage and start to see what was really there, and to bring it to fruition. So I feel like, executives play different roles in different films, but I think this is just an incredibly special collaboration, and that the goal really for all of us was to see it through and to do whatever we had to do to bring it to fruition.
Yeah, I mean, it's an incredible responsibility, and different probably from other projects that you all have worked on. So thank you so much for making it all happen. It's just, it is a real gift. And I imagine there were a lot of challenges and obstacles. Mike, I wanted to bring you in because, you were editing and also dealing with the many hours of footage and working with Kate and this whole team to figure out what is the story arc here, what is the best footage, what is the story that we're telling. What were your biggest challenges, and how did the team help you navigate?
Well, to echo what Carrie was just saying, I mean, it was just such an incredible, deep collaboration between many people. It was a wider collaboration than I'm accustomed to having in an editing experience. And that was really terrific, especially because Chaz was not alive for much of the editing process. In a way, I felt like having this working group of people who were so close to her and knew her so intimately and knew what she would have wanted in terms of making the film was just very reassuring, because I felt like there were big stakes with this film, and we wanted to get it right. I think one thing I wanted to point out about the editing was, and this echoes something that Nancy was saying earlier, is I was amazed at how much of their lives Nancy and Chaz were willing to film and share with the world. I mean, even things that seemed in the moment kind of banal, and that I would never pick up a phone and film myself speaking with my spouse on our deck about something. I mean, I was amazed at how much footage there was to work with. And then something that Kate recently was reminding me about, that the group, I think, was also very aware of, was there are all these moments in the film where Chaz kind of glances at the camera for just a minute. And this is something that somebody else also said earlier. She kind of knew what she was doing. And I feel like it's a common misunderstanding about documentary film that you just show up and you turn on the camera and you see what happens. It's a constructed experience. And I felt like there was this guiding spirit, you know, from Chaz every time there's that look at the camera. So anybody who has the desire or opportunity to view the film again, I suggest that you look for those moments. They're moments where you can kind of feel the filmmaker pressing her thumb ever so gently on the scales and nudging us toward the story that we ultimately found in the footage.
Yeah, I mean, for anybody who knew Chaz, she had fierce and strong opinions, and yeah, you can really feel her guiding voice, you know, in the whole, you know, the whole vision behind the film. So Joan, why don't you talk a little bit about your role, and also just, I'm really curious your perspective on the team. You know, it's not that common to have so many people, and it's not lost on me that Chaz was a member of like the New Day co-op. You know, she was really collaborative in her mindset. So can you talk about your experience of this team of mostly powerful women, and Mike, the person here with the he, him pronouns? How was that for you?
Well, I knew and loved and worked with Chaz on and off for many years. And it was right at the beginning, right after the diagnosis, that she said, I'm going to do this. I'm going to document this. And I want you, and it turned out the rest of this group, to really help me do that. And so starting right away at the very beginning, I got out my phone and started recording things that were happening. And as Nancy mentioned, I think we all felt some resistance initially. It was a very intimate and perhaps invasive thing to have the camera there while Chaz and Nancy were grappling with this diagnosis and with new, often bad news daily. And yet the camera and the collaboration between each of us was part of the story. You know, I'd wake up in the morning and there would be a text from Chaz to me and Lydia and Kate saying, I have a doctor's appointment at 2, who can come and shoot? And it was an honor, really, to be included. And it also felt like the only right way to be with Chaz through this whole thing. And one of the things we haven't mentioned yet is the actual death and dying scenes. Talk about intimacy, you know, the decisions that each of us had to make about picking up a camera during these really, really hard moments was made so much easier by the knowledge that we were a community and that we were all there in it together, and that this would live on to help other people who were going through this, and that was the foundation, as it was with everything Chaz worked on. That notion of, I'm making this film because other people will benefit from seeing it and from the movement it will be part of. She was really a movement person.
Yeah, I want to thank you all for filming the scene of her passing, because I think it must have been incredibly difficult, but I think it was the only choice in order to, you know, go along with the full vision behind the film, which was to confront difficult difficulty in death and dying and make it easier for people to talk about this issue. And I feel like her whole body of work was so groundbreaking in initiating and catalyzing conversations that hadn't yet been had, on LGBT parenting and bullying and, a whole host of social justice issues that she tackled in her body of work. And so even though I'm sure that must have been just incredibly difficult, I think it is a really big service to the community at large. So Kate, what can we expect with this film as it's launching into the world? I know there have only been a small number of screenings, but how can people engage their communities and show the film in more intimate spaces and have conversations with one another? How can that happen?
Well, Chaz was, on the vanguard of making sure that documentary film got used in the world. And so obviously our goal is to make sure this film gets used on a daily basis if possible. And that's one of the reasons we're working with JFCS right away to actually get those tools in the hands of organizations that can use them. So we're developing partnerships right now with organizations that will actually go out and take the film to their communities. Some of them that we already have on board, there's SAGE, which is the advocacy organization for LGBTQ seniors. There's also a group called INELDA, which is a death doula organization. They're teaching people how to, help people leave the world the same way that we help people come into the world. And we have several different organizations that are stepping up to the plate, national and local, and we're really excited about doing that work. That's actually our primary goal. And then luckily, the world is very excited about any Debra Chasnoff film ever. So we have several pieces of confidential good news that we're excited about. So we're hoping it'll be far in the festival world.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, I won't try to get the confidential information out of you, but we look forward to seeing what happens with this film as it unfolds. Thank you all so much for being here. I want to thank in particular our ASL interpreters today. We had Beth Abdullah and Tisha Riley. And so thank you so much for interpreting this conversation today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all so much on behalf of the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. Take care, everyone.